Good afternoon, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Luthorville. So for this episode, we're going to be talking about what is the best portable generator that you can get. So having said that, what is a portable generator? You know, that's something that I've known what they are for a long time. I know a lot of people out there know what they are, but in talking with friends and family and talking about what I'm doing in this next phase of the project, a lot of people had absolutely no clue what I was talking about. So, first, what exactly is a portable generator? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a little portable device that generates electricity, and they typically run on gasoline or on propane, and there are some that run on both. And there are really two types of generators. There are these pretty big backup generators. They can cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and they get hooked up to your house and to the electrical system of your home. And the idea is, if there's a power outage, let's say you live in a place that's subject to a lot of thunderstorms or hurricanes and things like that, where you have problems where your power goes out very frequently, then you would get one of these generators hooked up to your house, and they can actually turn on automatically when the grid power goes off. The other type of generator that you can get is the portable ones. And those, they're usually about the size of, let's say a cooler or something like that. And they range from about $300 up to thousands of dollars. And those are really used for the same type of situations. If, let's say, you have a power outage at your house, you can start up this little generator and power things in the home. The other thing that they're commonly used for is construction, right? If you're building a home, you're building any kind of physical structure out somewhere in the world, and you don't have power yet, right? Maybe it's a new housing development and they haven't hooked up all the electrical lines, but you still need to get some work done. You bring out this little portable generator and you can plug your tools into that and run all of these tools that run off of electricity. People also use portable generators to run an RV, or maybe for a barbecue or for something like that. You have a tailgate party and you need some energy to run things. These are all uses for portable generators. I have always wanted to get a portable generator as a backup for the electrical systems of the tiny house. I run everything off of solar power, and being out here in the desert, there is really no shortage of sunlight. However, in the winter, even in the Mojave Desert, you can have a number of overcast days. You can have a number of days where it's raining, and one day that's like that isn't that big of a deal. But when you have multiple days, it can really strain the solar power system because the batteries just aren't getting recharged adequately if it's overcast for 4 days in a row. Case in point, when I made this video, you can see it was a nice sunny day, and it should be sunny the day after and kind of the day after that, but then I could be looking at about 6 days in a row of it being overcast and rainy, which is just not going to work with solar panels. So let me explain to you exactly how my electrical system is set up. And I think once I go through that, you'll have a clearer understanding of how a portable generator fits in with that whole system. So basically, the tiny house has a bunch of outlets which are hooked up to a circuit breaker, right? Just like in a regular house. I also have these two boxes which are called fused disconnect boxes, and they actually have physical fuses in them that you switch back and forth. So if I'm on shore power, it is connected to the circuit breaker. The current flows through to the circuit breaker. And if I switch it over to the solar fuse disconnect box, then the current is flowing through that way. So in other words, only one box is on at any given time. When I'm on solar, this is how it works. So sunlight hits the solar panels generate electricity, which goes into the charge controller. The charge controller regulates the amount of electricity that's going into the battery bank. Then the inverter, which is converting the DC current of the batteries into AC current, is hooked up to the batteries. That pulls the current out of there, and then it sends it into the fused disconnect, which sends it into the circuit breaker. When I'm on shore power, it's working like this. So you can see that the solar panels and the battery bank and the charge controller are still running. Everything is still charging. The only difference is that the fused disconnect is no longer sending current from the solar version to the circuit breaker. Now, the fused disconnect for shore power is working, and there is a 30 amp RV plug that is connected to the fused disconnect for shore power. So if, for example, I have the tiny house at an RV park, I just run a cord from that 30 amp RV plug on the tiny house to an electrical outlet in the RV park. Or alternatively, I can hook up the generator, right? Then I just run an extension cord from the generator to the 30 amp plug, and that powers everything inside the tiny house. So I hope that this little illustration helps, and now it's very easy for you to understand how all of this functions. As I said, one of my biggest motives for having a portable generator is as a backup in case anything goes wrong with the solar system. Not that solar system. I mean the solar panels and the stuff on top of the house. So the other motive, though, is to keep warm, okay? It gets really freaking cold in the desert. And see, here's the problem. My solar array and my solar batteries and all that works fantastic in the summertime, but it's not all that great in the winter. So here's the issue. In the summer, you have very long days, right? Maybe 12, 13 hours of sunlight. And the sun is extremely high up in the sky, so it hits the solar panels really rock solid, and they generate a lot of electricity. The batteries get charged really, really well. In the winter, you have very short days. You might only have 9 or 10 hours of sunlight, and the sun is extremely low on the horizon, so the solar panels don't get as much energy, the batteries don't get charged as much. Plus, batteries don't hold their charge as well when it's really cold, okay? So in the summer, the time that you need electricity the most is in the middle of the day because it's really hot and you might want to run the air conditioner. In the winter, the time you need electricity the most is at night when it gets cold and you want to run the heater. But if your batteries aren't charging that well and you're having a lot of nighttime versus a lot of daytime, then it's really difficult to run the heater all night. So, what are my options for trying to improve my system in order to keep warm? I sat down and thought about all the pros and cons of the different options I have for generating heat in the tiny house. So first, I could use a propane heater. Now, the good thing is the propane heaters are very affordable, they're very effective in terms of heating, but I don't really like the idea of the off-gassing and, basically you have burned propane flowing around in the atmosphere of the house, and I really didn't want to do that. Plus, I'd also have to drill holes somewhere in the tiny house to run the fuel line from the propane tanks. The other option is I could increase my solar system, but there's a lot of problems there because my solar system is pretty much maxed out at this point. So I can't really replace just a couple things. I can't just add some batteries. I would basically have to replace the entire battery bank. I would have to get another charge controller because my current charge controller is actually pulling in the maximum wattage that it possibly can. So that would be a very expensive option. Another thing I could do is get a fireplace. This, again, has a lot of downsides to it. I mean, yes, it would generate some really great heat, but it's really heavy, it's kind of dirty, and again, I'd have to be drilling holes somewhere in the tiny house to account for the chimney and all that sort of thing. Now, I could build a solar air heater. That would be really great. It's very effective. The problem with those is that they're only going to work on bright, sunny days. Solar air heaters don't work at night, and they don't work if it's overcast. A vented propane heater, that's a pretty good option. That can alleviate the problem of the gas that's burning and venting into the house itself, but I still have to do a lot of work in terms of drilling holes and things like that through the walls of the tiny house. The next option is to get the portable generator, which is really great because I don't have to make any kind of modifications to the tiny house at all. And not only can it run the heater that I already have, but it can also run the air conditioner, it can run the water heater, it can run the toaster oven, it can run everything electrical. And of course, the final option of keeping warm in the tiny house is Demi Lovato. That's probably my favorite choice, but I really, really cannot afford that one. So this part of the video is the part that I'm the most excited to share with you guys, because this is the really geeky stuff that I did a lot of research on. And that is, how do you choose the best generator out there for your needs, right? So the thing that I did was I built a spreadsheet in Microsoft Excel to do a bunch of math for me and to figure out a bunch of calculations. And as a result, I figured out which generators are not only the most effective for my power needs, but I also figured out how much it actually costs to run all of these different generators. All right, so this spreadsheet represents all of the generators that I was researching. The one that I decided on is highlighted here in bold, which is the Champion 100-302, and these are all the statistics that were provided by the manufacturer. Now, this row is the exact same generator highlighted in green because these are the actual real-world performance numbers that I have been getting from the generator. So it's actually performing a little bit better than I expected. So all of these columns are pretty straightforward. The model of the generator is listed here. This is how much the generators cost. Here is the type of starter that the generator has. This is the running wattage of the generator, so that's how many watts the generator produces when it's going. This is how many gallons of gas each generator holds. Next, we have the gas runtime on a full tank at 25%. So what that means is this is how many hours the generator is supposed to run if you're pulling 25% of the load. So, in other words, the easiest one to do the math on is this one right here. This Yamaha 4500 puts out 4,000 watts. So that means if you're actually running 1,000 watts of power off that generator, which is 25% of its full capacity, that generator should be able to run for 20 hours. So the next column we have is the altitude, and this is because every single generator, regardless of the manufacturer, loses a little bit of power the higher it goes in altitude. Okay, so next we have gas per gallon. This is how much gasoline costs on average per gallon. And that's it. Those are all the numbers that we actually get from the manufacturer. And then everything in these green columns is all calculated automatically. So, for example, here we have gas watts at altitude. On my generator, it should be producing 3,500 watts. But because all generators, as I said, lose some of their power. They lose about 3.5% of their capacity for every 1,000 feet in altitude. My generator's maximum power output is only 3,185. So I am basing all of my numbers off of that. And this is how much wattage each generator produces at 50% and how much it produces at 37.5 and 25%. So I know this is a rather unusual number. You're like, what is that one about? Well, 37.5% is exactly halfway between 50% and 25%. So this is kind of the number that I've been targeting, and it's one of the reasons that I chose the generator I did, because I knew that my average power draw was going to be around 1,200 watts or so. So my generator fits in pretty well, 1,200 watts at 37.5% capacity. Now I also have 15 gallons of fuel that I can refuel the generator with, and I was curious as to how many times I'd have to refill each one of these generators with 15 gallons, because I have 3 tanks that are 5 gallons apiece. I also calculated the runtime off of a full tank at 50% capacity, and what is the runtime on all 15 gallons at 50% and at 37.5%. So this was important because I wanted to know how long can I run the generator before I have to go back out and refuel, right? That's something that anybody who has a kind of off-grid setup is going to want to know. Or even if you're just using it at your home in case of an emergency, how many days are you going to be able to run that generator before you need more gas? And next we have the runtime on a full tank with 100%, which of course you're probably never going to be pushing the generator to that much, at least you sure shouldn't be. And then of course the runtime at 25% is pretty darn long. Now the most important columns here are these. I actually calculated how much it costs to run this generator for an hour based upon different loads. And as I said, my target is this. My target is 37.5%, and this column determines the order that all these generators are listed in. As you can see, they get progressively more and more expensive. They burn more and more gas as you go down the list. So a larger generator that produces a lot more power obviously has a much larger engine. So that means that what you really want to do is get a generator that's going to fulfill your power needs at the most minimum cost, right? So as I said, I knew that I was going to maybe use around 1,200 watts on average. So I could say, okay, this generator is only costing me $530, and it is also one of the cheapest generators to run, because at 37.5% capacity, and if gas is $3.50 a gallon, it's costing me about 69 cents per hour to run that generator. And finally, some of these generators can also run on propane. So if it says 0 propane watts, that means it doesn't use propane. But if it does, I put in the wattage there. Now the problem with propane is that it doesn't produce as much energy as gasoline, and therefore it takes a lot more propane to produce an equal amount of power, and it actually ends up being more costly. So even though the propane itself is a lot cheaper, here you can see it's only $2.85 per gallon right now, but it's actually going to cost you more to run it on propane instead of gas. So let's say, for example, the propane cost per hour at 25% draw is about 74 cents per hour on this Westinghouse generator. So let's go back and look at how much does it cost to do 25% on gasoline. It's only 66 cents, so it's 10 cents cheaper per hour to run the generator on gas than it is to run it on propane. And not only that, but you're actually getting a little bit more wattage out of the gasoline, because if we look back here, we can see that 25% of the power on gas produces 864 watts, whereas 25% of the power on propane is approximately 757 watts. So all of these generators that run on both propane and gas are really not that great of an idea, because the propane, even though the propane itself is a lot cheaper than the gasoline, it's going to cost you more in the long run to run it on propane. Different generators have a lot of different features, right? There are generators that produce a modified sine wave. There are generators that produce a pure sine wave. There are inverter generators. And it's important to understand what all of this terminology means. So basically, see if I can explain this in the most simplistic of terms. So alternating current that you receive from a generator can be produced in basically 3 different ways, right? There's what they call really dirty power, and generators that produce power that's kind of dirty means that the actual wave, the sine wave of the electrical charge is not really consistent, and it can kind of jump around, it can have kind of spikes in it and things like that. And that is okay for equipment that is not electrically sensitive to those types of things, right? Let's say, for example, if you're working at a construction site, a lot of tools, electrical tools, they're usually not bothered by those kind of weird spikes and fluctuations in electricity. Now, another type of electricity that is produced is called a modified sine wave, which is basically a sine wave that is really squared off, okay? And that, most things can run on that and they'll be fine, but some really sensitive pieces of electronics, like for example, if you're recharging a smartphone or a computer or maybe even a television, it could potentially be damaged by a modified sine wave form of electricity. So the most safe kind, or the cleanest kind of energy, is called a pure sine wave. And that electrical charge has a very smooth kind of flowing fluctuation in the alternating current. Now, I've done a lot of research on this, and I can tell you that the results are not consistent at all. There are some people out there who purchase generators or inverters that produce a modified sine wave, and they end up frying their electronics the very first time they use it. You'll read stories from people who say, yeah, it zapped my refrigerator and my television the very first time I turned it on. Other people will buy those kind of products, modified sine wave generators, and they'll run them for years, and it won't harm their computers, it won't harm their phones, nothing, okay? So I honestly don't know what the results are going to be if I hook it up to my system. So as a result, I decided that I wanted a generator that produced a pure sine wave. Now, the terminology and the marketing that all these different companies use can be kind of confusing. So for the most part, companies that produce inverter generators will produce a pure sine wave electrical output. Companies that produce a, what is it called? AVR, automatic voltage regulator generator. Yeah, those are actually modified sine waves. This illustration should help to explain it. So inverters and generators are 2 completely separate pieces of equipment, okay? They have nothing to do with each other. So the fact that many generator manufacturers have started to call their generators inverters is a little confusing. So what an inverter does is it takes DC current and converts it to AC. So you have, let's say, an inverter that you can purchase for your car, right? Where it plugs into the 12-volt DC outlet of the car, and then you can plug in regular AC current devices. And those can be either pure or modified sine waves. You have to read the details about that particular inverter to know which type of sine wave it produces. Another type of inverter is like the one that I was talking about for the tiny house, where it takes the power from a battery bank and converts it from DC to AC current. Again, these can be pure sine wave or modified sine wave, and you have to pay attention to what type of device you're purchasing. Now, generators, if they're not labeled at all, they're probably producing a dirty sine wave. If the generator says it has AVR or an automatic voltage regulator, it's producing a modified sine wave. And if the generator is called an inverter generator, it's producing a pure sine wave. So it's really confusing. I think they should have just said, look, this is dirty, modified, or pure. It would have been a lot clearer, but that's not what generator manufacturers have done. So I hope this clears it up and you have a better understanding of the difference between like an AVR generator and an inverter generator. Inverter generators that produce the pure sine wave are usually more expensive, but in my opinion, it's probably worth it because I didn't want to take the risk. I felt like I would rather spend a few $100s extra and know that I'm getting a generator that's really safe. However, I lucked out because the generator that I purchased was actually under $500, which is pretty much unheard of for an inverter generator. Most inverter generators start at about $1,000 and up. So the fact that I got mine at such a great price was very cool. These are photos of the actual generator that I own. And this is really the most ideal generator for my needs. I think you can see from the research that I have done, and as I said, from the power requirements that I have, why I would go with a generator like this one. This thing weighs probably about 80 to 90 pounds, so you can, pick it up and move it around. You can see right there, that's an attachment point for a set of wheels. So you can purchase a little wheel kit if you want wheels to roll it, but I find, at 80 to 90 pounds, you can just pick the thing up. I took most of these photos with the generator sitting on the back of my truck because that's probably the easiest place for me to do the oil changes on it. And all of these kind of generators are basically just single-cylinder little gas engines, like an engine that you would have in a lawnmower, right? So they're all really loud. And I find it very strange and kind of amusing that most generator reviews on the internet tend to really obsess over how loud is the generator. That's just stupid to me. I mean, it's a lawnmower engine. They're all loud. You just got to deal with that. Go, okay, I'm getting a generator. It's loud. So I don't know why people are so obsessed with, how quiet or how loud it is, but they're all fairly noisy. But in the words of Tony Stark, it's not about me. So I am going to show you a little bit about how quiet the generator gets as you get further away. Now you should be able to see the generator there off in the distance. Right now I am exactly 200 feet away from the generator. It also happens to be a very windy day, and the wind is blowing from this direction, so it's kind of blowing the sound away from us. But the generator is running, and as I get closer to it, you'll be able to hear the difference. You'll be able to hear how much louder it gets. Now, right about here, I can start to hear it. It's still pretty quiet though. And I am about 135 feet away. And we walk a little bit closer. And again, there's a good maybe 12, 15 mile an hour wind. In fact, that's the reason that I shot this footage from the direction that I did. I don't like being backlit by the sun, but the thing is, if I were to shoot on the other side, then I would get a lot of wind into the microphone, and I wanted my body to block the wind. So right here, we're about 50 feet away from the generator, and I imagine, I'm sure you can probably start to hear it by now. And right now I'm about 30 feet away. 30 feet from the generator. Of course, it is enclosed, which means that that's muffling the sound a lot more. So let me open up the shed and you'll be able to hear how much louder it gets when the shed is open. So there we go. So again, I'm not going to mess with the sound in this part of the video. You know, I'm just going to let it be natural. So here now my body is blocking a lot of the sound of the generator, obviously, but if I turn back around, you'll be able to hear how loud it is from about 50 feet. So it's really not that bad, and once you put it inside the shed, it really quiets the thing down a lot. I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope that maybe you learned some things about portable generators that you didn't know before, and it will now be easier for you if you're in the market to get something like that. You kind of know a little bit more of what to look for. So as always, thank you so much for checking this out. Thank you for watching. And remember, folks, if your ambitions do not scare you, they are not big enough.